Historian David McCullough says history is who we are and why we are the way we are. It's also where we are. What is this thing and how did it get here? And what's its connection to the basin you walked past on your way in here? Another historian once famously remarked, to understand history requires that you understand money, and he forgot what the other thing was. Indeed, what else explains how the world's biggest, richest cities got to be where they are? Shanghai, Rio de Janeiro, New York, all were established and grew wealthy on trade that reached a spectacular zenith between the 15th and 17th centuries, a period we're taught in school to call the Age of Exploration. They might as well have told us to call it the Age of Sail, for that was the technology that made it all possible. Sailing has global roots. There are anthropologists who argue that Chinese sailors beat Christopher Columbus to America. Some argue that the Phoenicians achieved the same. The Burj Al Arab in Dubai is a testament to sailing's Arabic origins, when the great Ahmad ibn Majid conducted Vasco da Gama on the final leg of his journey from Africa to India. But 600 years ago, no culture benefited from sailing like England. It was sail that allowed England and the East India Trading Company to control enormous markets of tea and spice. To the west, they dominated the market in fur, something which became so important to Native Americans that when styles changed in the 18th century and the market collapsed, Native American villages were plunged into poverty. The Hudson Bay Trading Company, however, diversified, turned their trading posts into stores, and grew. Today, they own Saks Fifth Avenue and are still trading on the New York Stock Exchange as HBC. Slave trade, too, functioned by sail, with textiles from England transported to Africa, traded for human beings who were shipped off to New World tobacco, sugar, and cotton plantations. It was the greatest forced exodus in the history of mankind, with estimates of dead Africans as high as 60 million in the course of time. For centuries, the sea was where a young man escaped to seek his fortune or to run from the law, where he learned the ropes and other vocabulary that would allow him to communicate with merchant seamen from foreign countries. Chock-a-block refers to the condition of a block and tackle when the sails are out and the mechanism is collapsed on itself. To refer to someone as a loose cannon obviously suggests they are as dangerous and unpredictable as a huge steel apparatus tossing about on the deck of a ship at high sea. A ship's logbook is where a captain maintained a record of the number of knots paying out on a piece of rope behind the boat as they traveled in order to estimate his speed in knots. When sailors had a chance to actually sit down and enjoy a really full meal, they would cut a chunk of board off of a plank and use it as a plate on which they enjoyed a square meal. So, centuries of stable activity were suddenly interrupted by invention of the steam engine. Suddenly, textile mills did not have to be located near rivers anymore. There was new demand for steel, and gas lighting came to London. All these things needed the same coal which had to come from far away in the Midlands in the north, where sailing vessels couldn't reach them. But pack trains could. A horse can carry about 300 pounds of coal. Hitched to a cart, they can pull a ton. But with the English weather and dirt roads that turned to quagmire, frequently they could pull none at all. So it was as revolutionary as the internet when Francis Egerton, the third Duke of Bridgewater, teamed up with surveyor James Brindley to build England's first modern canal, the Bridgewater Canal, 12 miles from the Duke's Worsley mine to Manchester, a relatively short distance that involved multiple feats of engineering genius. They developed a manually driven crane for loading starvationers at the mine face, locks to raise and lower boats across the hilly terrain, and one of the first aqueducts across the River Irwin. Try and imagine the novelty. Horses pulling boats in the sky. The Barton Aqueduct was an 18th century tourist attraction. But most importantly, the same horse that could pull a ton of coal in a cart could now pull 10 tons in a boat. Heck, you didn't even need a horse. The Duke flooded Manchester with coal. The price fell by 2/3 in the first year, and he still made a fortune. Congress passed Canal Acts. A speculative frenzy developed. Canal mania, just like the tulip mania of Holland a few hundred years previous, and the dot-com bubble that would come hundreds of years later. Money flooded in. Fortunes were made, and England was transformed. It took almost 30 years for teams of Irish navvies to complete the first canal from the Midlands to Oxford, providing an inland link to London via the Thames. But the Oxford Canal is narrow. Even today, you can't get a wide beam through it. So 5 years later, competitors complete the Grand Junction Canal to Brentford, shaving 60 miles of perilous and unreliable travel off the existing route to London. But the Thames is a river and subject to drought and flood. So another company, in 1801, just 5 years later, completes a shortcut from Hayes as close to the city as they can, a tiny village called Paddington, making it possible to build a coal gas production and distribution facility, the bare bones of which you saw outside before you got into the boat. Those gas holders outside, where millions of tons of coal from the north completed their journey and were burned into gas, connect you to a different age. The canals that brought it there still connect you to the world through a 2,000-mile network in England and down the Thames to the sea and everywhere else.